Thank you for joining us for The Drive Back, the movie podcast where we imitate our favorite thing to do after a movie, which is to talk about it on the ride home. Of course, I'm Garrett, and as always, I'm joined by my good friend and co-host Adrian.
Hey, I'm still here.
I would hope so. Hopefully you didn't get washed away. And joining us again, we have a returning guest, our good friend of the show, Miss Hannah Rabatin below us.
Hello.
Glad to have you back, Hannah.
Thank you for having me back.
Well, today we thought we'd bring you back for another double feature, which is where Adrian and I each select a movie, we watch them both, and we review them both here on the show with our listeners. So all this and more coming up on The Drive Back. All right, so yeah, another double feature today with two movies that, like the last episode, couldn't be any more different. In terms of tone, and dare I say quality, but we'll get more into that a little bit later. So the first movie we're going to be talking about today was Adrian's pick, which is 2012. Released in 2009, it was directed by Roland Emmerich and stars John Cusack, Chiwetel Ejiofor, and Danny Glover. A frustrated writer struggles to keep his family alive when a series of global catastrophes threatens to eliminate mankind. The second film today is Lawrence of Arabia, which was my pick. Released in 1962, it was directed by David Lean and stars Peter O'Toole, Omar Sharif, and Anthony Quinn. An English officer named T.E. Lawrence successfully unites and leads the diverse, yet often warring, Arab tribes against the Ottoman Empire during World War I. It was nominated for 3 Oscars, including Best Actor for Peter O'Toole, Best Supporting Actor for Omar Sharif, and Best Adapted Screenplay. It won 7 Oscars for Best Editing, Best Color Cinematography, Best Art Direction, Best Sound, Best Original Score, Best Director, and Best Picture.
I noticed you didn't call out the awards for 2012. Could you please go ahead
that?
and do that?
There's, unfortunately, as far as I know in the industry, there's no award for sheer volume of water. But 2012 would have won that. But speaking of 2012, let's go right into it. Adrian, why did you pick 2012? What made you pick that one?
I picked 2012 because I remember watching it, and I read a book about 2012. Like, when 2012 was happening, I was very invested in the idea that the world was ending, even though I did not buy into that. I just was fascinated about the whole idea, so I went to the theaters to see this movie. I remember it being just an absolute roller coaster from beginning to end. And on the rewatch, honestly, it still was. This movie is absolutely wild from beginning to end, from all the different characters in it to circumstances. I mean, it is just absolutely crazy.
Gotcha. Hannah, what are some general spoiler-free thoughts before we dive in?
Oh, spoiler-free thoughts. Well, it's certainly a movie. And it's funny too because I remember when it came out, I was very young. I was like elementary school still, like about to go into middle school when this came out, and that fear of 2012, like the world ending, was genuine. Like as a kid, you believe that. And so when I saw that movie coming out, I was terrified of it, and I never wanted to see it. So I didn't. But when I was like in middle school, I did. And I remember seeing bits and pieces of it, but I didn't remember it completely because I think I purposely blocked it out. Yeah. So if you're wondering,
I feel like we're gonna think very differently.
Let's just say if that was an inclination about how I feel about the movie. It's a movie. It exists. It's here.
It meets the requirements for film.
Barely.
For being called a motion picture. Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Like you two, I remember when this came out, I remember the teaser trailer, which was just the footage of the monk up in the tower ringing the bell, and then the wave hits. And I remember that was such a cool teaser trailer, because this is the same director as The Day After Tomorrow, which is I think a great disaster movie, and Independence Day, which is just, I mean, come on, it's Will Smith, Jeff Goldblum talking about aliens. But this movie, rewatching it now and having seen it multiple times and knowing the ending, this movie's a horrible mess. And Like,
I mean, it wasn't good, but I mean, it wasn't terrible.
Let's talk about how the first 2/3 of this movie are exciting enough. It's got some great disaster sequences, but the last third of this movie is awful and is some of the worst filmmaking I've ever seen.
I'm so excited to dive into it.
It's gonna be good.
But let's go ahead and drop the spoiler warning. 2012, we are going to be spoiling it if you haven't seen it already. Well, spoiler alert, 2012 didn't happen, so there's that out of the way. But
oh yeah, it's not a documentary. It was in 2012, but it is no longer a documentary.
It was in 2009, leading up to 2012, and it probably wouldn't have been one of the movies that was saved either. But it is available to stream on Netflix and on Prime Video for those of you who have those subscription services. So let's go ahead and talk about it. Let's go ahead and get the big elephant out of the room. This is a disaster movie. Obviously, there have been a lot of disaster movies that have come out. Day After Tomorrow, San Andreas, and even more recently with, I guess, the underrated Greenland, which was supposed to be somewhat decent, which had Gerard Butler and Marina Baccarin in it. Let's start with the obvious. How are the disaster sequences in this movie? Do you guys think that they stack up to other disaster movies? Are they better? What do you guys think?
Our guest can go first. I'd love to hear how do they stack up.
Oh, okay. Well, okay. The first initial one is like I can accept that. I think that's like it goes all out. I hate when it's like a gradual buildup of like, oh, something's going to happen. They give the little teasers beforehand of like things are starting to go right, but when it hits the fan, it hits the fan.
Yeah.
And so I can appreciate that. I'm like, okay, good. We're not like sugarcoating anything. It's happening. However, it gets old very quick. It's a lot of this like you expect it. It's not surprising. It's repetitive. I was never shocked by anything. Mm. The only like shocking, I guess, part of the movie was the initial thing of like how quick it happened and how it went from 0 to a 10 really quick, and how it went from like an everyday thing to like, we gotta go. So that was like, oh, we're going. Okay, it's happening. But then from there on out, it's the same thing, repackaged in different scenes, basically, until you get to the end. So
sort
that's
of
how I
similar,
feel about it.
Different disasters, yeah.
Yeah, it's and maybe not necessarily a bad thing, but it stays like at a 10 for most of the movie. It never like relents. Like you don't get like even the Yellowstone disaster sequence, which is I would say not as interesting as say the Los Angeles literally sliding into the ocean and things like that. It still stays at a 10. It still stays at that maximum level for 2/3 of the movie again, and then it just starts to, again, roller coaster, but like the roller coasters in Roller Coaster Tycoon, it's not complete, and you have it crashing into the ground.
Right.
But I think the disaster sequences, even though this movie is very flawed, I think the disaster sequences are a lot of fun. Particularly, like Hannah said, the Los Angeles sequence in the beginning, I think is the one that everyone remembers because it is so drawn out and it is so much longer.
I agree with both of you, I guess. I do totally think that it is a 10 for most of the movie, and that can be very tiresome, for sure. Mm-hmm. Like, it's just like working out. Like, you exhaust yourself, and it's like, okay, we're at a 10. But I also think that I really enjoyed seeing... I guess I like that in disaster films, but I really enjoyed seeing just the destruction actually shown on screen. Like, we were at a point when this came out where CGI was good enough to actually showcase entire land masses splitting apart and things like that. So at least, especially like, I guess this was after Day After Tomorrow, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So Day After Tomorrow kind of like started this with the water tsunami effects and freezing over and all that stuff. And then this one, I felt they like honed their disaster simulation and then just put it in every single frame of this whole movie. And I really liked watching it.
It's almost one of those things you have to commend too. It's almost like the studio gave Roland Emmerich like, no, here's all the money, make what you want. But there has to be a human story in it at the end, and
they tried.
Again, that's where it really falls apart. But we'll talk about that in a minute. Let's kind of go over performances in this movie. Anything stand out to you? I think Chiwetel Ejiofor is the only standout in this movie. The only character I care about. But is there anything else you guys think was standout-ish?
I don't know if anyone was standout. I thought they were all serviceable.
I mean, standout in a negative way, not in the like, ooh, They did a great job.
Sure.
I have my whole thing is like, and it's a tough situation because I understand it, but like with kid actors, they're either really good or they're just awful. There's no in between. And if a kid actor is in it and it's not working, it takes you out of the whole film. Those kids, I glued in on because they were smiling in like the majority of the disaster scenes. They're like trying to hold back their laughter a lot. And I'm like, oh God, okay. So immediately, and I don't hold it against the kids, obviously, but there are really good kid actors out there, which is why I don't find it excusable to like have that situation. I feel like, you know, if there were the kid actors were like, and it sounds awful because I'm like, kid actors are bad, but they're not. It's just that if you pick the right ones for the right job, it'll work out great. And I just don't think it was a good fit for this one.
I think this movie's also really hard to kind of bring kid actors into because this movie was, I don't know, but 99% green screen.
Yeah, you have to use your imagination. And so when you tell a kid, oh, like, the world is falling apart around you, be scared, and they're looking at, like, a green wall, I mean, they're going to laugh. They're going to be like, this
in
is
order
so
to have kids do well in this particular film, I feel like they would have needed to be cream of the crop kid actors. Like, this is such a challenging movie for someone inexperienced to do. But to that point, also, a lot of the adult actors did not do that successfuli in this movie.
No, I agree 100%.
I think it's a very hard movie to pull off.
I think a lot of the main actors,
Yeah, and but what I was like realizing as I got closer to the end of the film, this acting and this whole thing, even the plot, the writing, everything, this would have worked incredibly if it was a comedy. Because a lot of it to me was very comical. Like, I mean, I was just flat out, like, I was not upset or distressed or nervous or anything. I found so many scenes so funny. Because, I mean, with the way that the writing is, how cheesy and cliche, the running scene of him chasing the plane, it's hilarious. So funny. So with the tone of how everyone was acting, even the adult actors, if this was advertised as a comedy, I would have loved it. I would have given this a 10 out of 10. But because it's not, and they took it seriously, and it was supposed to be an actual, like adventure sci-fi action, didn't work.
To be fair, I know the expectation is not on the audience members to take it seriously, I don't think.
Right.
But it shows in them trying to take it seriously.
Yeah, clearly.
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, clearly that they had originally intended it to be a very serious thing.
Mm-hmm. Totally. I think that's why I liked this movie, rewatching it so much, is because I just had so much fun watching it. Because of how just over the top 100% of the time it is. Everything is like maximum stakes, never a dull moment in terms of what's happening on screen. The movie can be very dull at times because it's just constant barrage of overload to your senses. But yeah, I definitely think I agree with you. It could have been a comedy, and I think it would have done really well as a comedy.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. And I do want to point out, for some reason, Hollywood has this tendency of finding the best presidents ever. I would love to have Danny Glover as the president. Someone who's that selfless. I would absolutely love that. No, you all go ahead.
Yeah, let's take my seat on the only plane out of here kind of thing. But also, how terrible when the ash suffocates everyone and then he wakes up again only to be bombarded by the largest wave in human history.
Not even that, it's also the aircraft carrier falls on him first. And
he's like, oh man, I lived, a little scratched up in the throat, but should be fine. And it's just absolute devastation.
That would be great.
Oh my God.
But we've all kind of touched on it. Let's go ahead and discuss plot in this movie. And, we'll get it out of the way. This movie is not realistic at all. The way that everything happens would not happen in real life. There's several YouTube videos out there with climatologists and, experts who say that this would not happen this way. The plates cannot fall back into the ocean. We can't turn the Earth. Wisconsin can't become the new South Pole.
Which is the biggest letdown that you've said so far. I vote to make Wisconsin the South Pole just because.
All right, so Adrian's got it out for Wisconsin. Let's go ahead and
sign my change.org, please. It has one signature.
But let's go ahead and talk about the most controversial and probably the in my opinion, the worst part of the story is the entire last third having to deal with the Arks and how they're saving mankind. What do you guys think about that?
I mean, it really meant nothing to me. I didn't care. I really, by that point, that sounds awful. At that point, I was like, honestly, the only thing saving this movie is if everyone just died. Like, humanity was wiped out. And that's so dark and so bad, but...
I think that would have saved it. I agree.
Genuinely. I think that would have saved it, because it was like, I mean, honestly, even the whole idea of that they would only put, like, the wealthy people on the ship, it makes no sense logically, because you're like, oh, but who's gonna, like, actually work and, like, keep everything going, you know what I mean? None of it made sense, so I was so over it. I was like, everyone just drown.
That's actually something they address, is that I forget the government guy's name, but they did go out and genetically test people to see who would be best to carry on the species. They did go for scientists and, people like that, but the story in the movie focused on how they get the wealthy on. And I think that maybe it is the movie's fault in not exploring enough about what they did to actually save the human race. Yeah. But of course that's not going to get as emotional as, why would you let the rich on? Which, speaking of rich, the whole Russian storyline was just incredibly comical.
I couldn't handle that.
Adrian, what were your thoughts on the Arks? Because it looks like you had some reaction to that.
No, I think the plot is pretty ridiculous, but I did like the concept. I think the idea that there would be some sort of vessel that would have a select group of people, I think it would be, of course, approached completely differently in reality or in practical application, but the concept to me was fascinating. And I think that's kind of what drove me through that last portion of the film, is just thinking about how that would work in real life, because I don't even know if it would be on land. It might be like we would figure out how to shoot people into space, but there would be some type of, like, arc that we would attempt, at least, if we had the lead time on the end of the world. So I just thought that was super interesting. But yeah, the whole thing, and then when one whole arc just doesn't work anymore, and like what is it? How many people is that? Probably like 200,000 people it's supposed to be, or how many people fit on a single one, are suddenly just like, no, you can't cross. Like, they're at airport security at the end of the world. I thought that was pretty ridiculous.
I mean, also the fact that, like, they did all this work to save artwork and animals and things like that, which were clearly designed to be put on all 7 or 8 of those arcs.
7, I think. Yeah.
And only 3 of them make it?
Yeah.
What happened? Where are all the platypuses?
Possums are gone.
Like, floating around. Like, India and Tibet and all that, just like, oh, that's horrible. But...
well, they were, I think they brought them to the Ark.
No, they did, yeah.
So they just died in the Ark. They just stayed there. I did like them carrying the animals, though. I just thought that was very fun. I think that was a cool idea. Can you imagine? Someone had to design custom fit harnesses for every animal on the planet.
I love how you're having so much more fun thinking about the stuff that's not on screen.
But that's why I liked the movie, because it was more thought provoking to me, and just like, it's one of those things, like, when we're kids, we all say, would I survive an apocalypse? Like, oh, I would go to Costco. I'd go here. I would do this. So watching the movie, for me, it was whatever it was, like 2.5 hours of being like, I'd survive that. Or, oh no, I wouldn't survive that. And that's fun to me. I just love to, like, be imaginative with that. So I got a lot of fun out of it.
It's that same question, like, every time I watch a movie like this or any kind of disaster or something like that, is what would actually happen if this happened? Like, the government wouldn't respond in the way they did. There wouldn't be, like, if they were truly prepared for this, it wouldn't have been just total chaos. Like, those are the kind of things I like to think about afterward. But I do agree this movie is a lot of fun. It's just mindless fun, at least for the first 2/3, with all the destruction scenes and such. And then you remember that there are some bad child actors, and there's John Cusack running for some reason, because that's what I like to watch John Cusack doing. But
of course. And then driving a limo over like an exploding planet for a solid 30 minutes. And like, yeah, not only is it a car, it's the longest vehicle, which just ups the ante that the back wheels will fall in. But also, one of the scenes I want to talk about in particular that really pulled me out of the movie was, besides the whole movie itself, was the part where, so John Cusack, I forget his name in the movie, but he has an ex-wife who they are also with that person's husband, like the new husband or boyfriend.
Yeah.
Or whatever. So that guy dies, and then literally like 3 minutes later, she's making out with John Cusack again, and everyone's just a family. And no one talks about the fact that the boyfriend, that the kid is specifically called out for idolizing this man. That man is just gone, and it is never talked about after like one sentence.
It's just completely just crushed in the gears, and they're like, he didn't make it.
He's like, I'm sad. He's like,
get over it. Yeah. Get over it. I just imagine, like, because we did the Mortal Kombat review, just like Scorpion, like, get over it.
Yeah, basically. And this movie definitely had, of course, a ton of dumb choices, like when he has to go unclog the gears and he says, hey, you need to stay here, I'm going by myself. And then the mom looks away from the kid, and then the kid is now drowning underwater. It's like, come on, people, just get it together.
I mean, for me, going into it, as I'm a biased in that I don't like disaster films and that they follow a lot of these cliches. It's rare that you find a disaster film that is very unique and different from the rest.
Sure.
And it's always just it's problem after problem, but they don't have purpose except for just being a problem. You know what I mean? It does nothing for the plot. It just is a problem.
Just another inconvenience.
Yes, exactly. And it's so annoying and so frustrating because you're like, okay, this could be good if I knew that there was a reason for this happening and that there was a bigger consequence at the end of this that would make me realize, okay, this is a game changer, that everything just changed. But nothing does. It's all the same stuff. And again, the boyfriend, justice for the boyfriend. He was a great character. I don't think he should have died out of everyone. I mean, damn.
We need a Cusack cut where he lives.
Yes, yeah, for real. Like, what? Justice. I need it. Like, oh my god. But yeah, I mean, in general, honestly, the entire family plot is too much for me. I wasn't about it. I hated it. It's a cliche. Like, gotta save the family. And then at the end, they all end up back together. They were a broken family, but now that the world is broken, we're together. Yeah. Like, okay. Like,
well said.
Can
I get that tattooed?
It's a piss poor attempt at trying to make an emotional connection, right? It's the same reason you get human and family storylines in movies like Godzilla vs. Kong and things like that. Mm-hmm. Is to try and anchor the audience, but we're there to see a lot of people dying in really creative and inventive ways. But
could it be different? Like, I feel like if you just get rid of the whole family plot altogether, focus mainly on like the actual event of like, okay, the world's ending, and have the main guy just be in like the government and like he becomes a key factor in like trying to save everyone. I think that's way more interesting. Of like, okay, we are already thinking like, okay, what are the people in power going to do about this? And so if we have someone in power, like as our main character, it would be way more intriguing because you're like seeing the inside of everything happening. Yeah. That would have been great. I'm done with the family stuff. Stop giving me the family crap. I've seen it. I know how it's going to end. I'm over it. And if they die, I don't care. You know what I mean? Like, just give me something new.
A couple things. First off, turns out I really took a misstep in suggesting a disaster film for this episode. So I'd like to formally apologize for making everyone watch this.
Oh my god, no.
Second off, I think I was just thinking about it while you guys were talking, because I agree that the family stuff, it's even in Godzilla and all, though, like, it's filler to just justify people fighting and disaster happening. Right. I wonder how interesting this movie would have been if it were done in a similar way to the film Vantage Point, where the same event happens multiple times, but we see it from around the world and people that like we don't know yet. It's just different families, different isolated incidents, but the same cataclysmic event happening around the world. And that way we get to see the destruction, and they still kind of get to have that little bit of story. And I know it's all speculation, but I think that could have made this movie a lot more interesting.
Definitely. I can totally see, like, maybe like from like the fire department's point of view, and then like a civilian and the government and like all these different points of view looking in.
And then you piece together like the whole story. Like maybe there is an underlying story that the government knew about it ahead of time, and you find that out towards the end of the movie, and they could kind of reveal plot points that way. Like especially in the first vantage point, we see like that they just found out about it with like 5 minutes to spare, and then later in the movie you found out that people were hiding it. Like they could have done a lot more with it and still shown the same destruction. I think they could have just. I think they just wanted. They couldn't get Nicolas Cage, so they got John Cusack.
Yes.
And it would have been way better with Nicolas Cage.
Which knowing is a better disaster movie than this one.
Agreed.
I would say. But I actually have a question for Hannah. So you say you don't like disaster films, and I'm guessing it's mostly like the big event disaster films, like San Andreas and this one. What about other movies that were classified as like disaster films, like Deepwater Horizon, or ones of those where it's like an actual real life disaster? Are those separated in your mind? Are they the same genre, or is it like?
No, when it's like based off of like a real like event that happened, like something like that, or like a real phenomenon, like it's a bit different just because it has more of like value to it. So it's like it has real human stories behind it and experiences behind it. So there I have more of an appreciation for it. But it, whereas if you're just going to give me something like phenomenal, like in this sense of like it's out of this world basically, I'm going to have higher expectations for it, Whereas with that other situation of like, oh, it's based off of like a different type of like a disaster that happened way back. I'm going to be like, okay, like I am intrigued. I need to know what this experience is like, You know what I mean? Because then it's like, now I'm buying into it, like really, because I'm like, okay, there's actually some truth to this. So
I'm going to learn something from watching this about the event. Yeah.
Exactly. That's why I feel like you get more of that emotional connection to it. Whereas I'm so distant from this experience because it's not real. It never happened, and it probably is never going to happen, or at least not like that,
Wow. Knock on wood. My goodness.
Knock on wood. I don't think CGI planes are going to be flying. I don't think any of that shit's going to happen when the world ends, okay? Like, so I think we're good, but yeah.
So any final thoughts or anything else you guys want to add before we get on to giving some scores for 2012?
My final thoughts would be I certainly don't think I would have survived this movie if I were in it. I think I would have been like, it's going to be fine, and then my house would fall into the earth. I think that's probably about as far as I'd get in reality. I think the movie itself was just a lot, and it was really fun. I think it'd be great if you wanted to have like a drinking game every time John Cusack says something ridiculous. Be blacked out before LA falls. Who knows? You could just get crazy. But I think it's super fun to watch with friends. Like, it's just a movie that I like we all said, I think it'd be really funny to make fun of. It's really humorous in that aspect. Like, it's funny how serious it tries to be. And I got a lot of enjoyment out of that, so I'd probably give it a higher score than both of you, I'm guessing. But I liked it just for the fun aspect solely.
Sure. Hannah, anything you want to add or give a final thought before we review?
Yeah. My final thoughts are like, yeah, if you go about it expecting it to like be something you're going to make fun of, it's a really good time. But if you're going in it with a serious like experience of like, oh, I want to see how this movie is, disappointing. I found it very, for me, again, as someone who doesn't like disaster films, it was harder for me to get through it than Lawrence of Arabia. It felt longer than Lawrence of Arabia for me, even though that's very much so not true, actually, like at all.
Chronologically false.
Yeah, it felt long for me. So yeah, for me, it was just not it.
Gotcha. One thing I'd like to point out, actually, before we get to my final thoughts is I think Woody Harrelson was a great casting choice to play the crazy conspiracy theorist.
Super fun.
He was a super funny character. I mean, he wasn't like great, but he was a funny addition to the cast.
Definitely.
But my final thoughts, I think it's just a ridiculous, fun disaster movie, at least for the first 2/3. At least some inventive disaster sequences, like especially the LA one sticks out to me, and I've remembered that for the last 12 years.
Totally,
like,
yeah.
Because it's just so unique, and not a lot of other movies do it the same way. Not even San Andreas did it the same way. No. But again, if you're looking for something really mindless, like if you're into like the Fast and Furious movies and things like that, I feel like this is gonna be another one of those movies that you would really enjoy. No insult to fans that are, of Fast and Furious. I don't want to direct anything at Adrian there.
I'd like also to clarify that Garrett has never seen any of the Fast and Furious.
That is true.
That is a very shallow statement coming from Garrett.
But I mean, like fun and ridiculousness over like a really like a good plot and things like that. But I had fun watching it, but like at the end of it, I was like, I just wasted my time. So,
whoa!
But let's go ahead.
Both of you, my goodness.
But let's go ahead, and Adrian, it sounds like you want to give that score of yours. What did you give it?
Yeah, like I said, I think this movie was really fun. I definitely, if people came over and were like, let's watch a movie, and I'd be like, do we want to watch John Cusack in 2012? I think that sounds like a perfect night to me. So I gave this movie a 63. That is the only thing that this movie has going for it, is that it sounds like a great time to hang out and watch. The actual movie itself is it's a disaster. See what I did? But I think that, I think it's only fun, and it has no other like accreditations that I could give it. It just doesn't do anything else besides be funny, and it doesn't intend to be. So that's where it takes all the negatives from.
Gotcha. Hannah, what did you give it for a score?
Well, as a comedy, a 90, but as it is, like a 40, like below failing. That, I mean, try harder. Here's what we'll do. Give me a 2012 remake, and then we'll talk. But
with
it's gotta be
Cage.
With Nicolas Cage, exactly, and it's gotta be a straight comedy. All right.
I love it.
Then we'll see.
I'm frankly amazed with how Hannah was talking about it. I gave this movie a 29, and I think I enjoyed it more than Hannah did. So that's really fascinating to me.
For the production value, the higher for like.
Yeah, like if I owned this movie on 4K, I wouldn't be upset because it would look good on 4K, even the really bad stuff at the end. So, I can't give it like a really, really bad score, but it was fun enough while I was watching it, and then it's just, again, you kind of like, I kind of wasted my time. But
hey, wow. That is what it is.
It is what it is. Let's go ahead and change gears. Real
quick, before we change gears, I think Nicolas Cage and Sigourney Weaver should be the couple in the next one.
I love it. I think that's perfect.
Yes.
I need that.
Sigourney Weaver or Jamie Lee Curtis?
Oh, I will one up all of us right here. Speculation hour. Welcome to Adrian's Corner. 2012 to 2013 should star Nicolas Cage and Judi Dench as the romantic couple.
Judi, yes! Oh my god. Where do I sign? I'm producing this. It's happening.
With Nicolas Cage as the current U.S. president and Judi Dench as the Queen of England.
Oh yeah. Uniting forces, yes.
Like the obviously not Queen of England playing the Queen of England.
But let's go ahead and change gears into something a little bit more serious. And that is going to be Lawrence of Arabia, which was my pick for this episode. Very interested to see what the general consensus is on this one. But before we dive into any kind of spoiler talk, I guess we should give our general thoughts. Adrian, what were your general thoughts on Lawrence of Arabia?
Oh, I thought you picked it. I thought you were gonna go first. I hadn't seen this. I had not even like. I mean, I had heard of it, but it was definitely not on my radar. I knew it was supposed to be a really good movie, but it was definitely not on my list of things, and that was my fault. I do think it obviously holds up to all the acclaim that it's gotten. It's pretty incredible. It doesn't feel like 4 hours. I know we said it was really long. But the movie is kind of broken up in a way that it doesn't even feel like one movie. It kind of splits itself, and it's done in such a unique and masterful way that it kind of like gives you that energy that you need of watching something new right in the middle while continuing the same story. I don't know who directed it, and I probably should, but they are a master of their class for sure. It was incredible.
The director is David Lean.
Yeah. Yeah, incredible. I thought it was really, really well done.
Hannah, some general thoughts before we dive in.
Yeah, I never saw it. I only ever heard about it. And I feel the same way. And the reason why it feels like two separate movies is because like into one is like they actually have the intermission. So it's like it made sense back in the day when they were showing it. I would love to go see this in theaters on a 70 millimeter screen. I loved this so much. Again, I didn't notice the time. I was invested. Acting, incredible. Story, incredible.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
I mean, and I also didn't really know any of the backstory of it, and I'm a little slow at times, so like the whole war and conflict thing like kind of like went over my head, so I stopped to research it. And then I found out that this was based off of I didn't know this was a real person, and I didn't know that he wrote a book and this is what it's based off of. So it blew my mind. And so when I knew that, I was like, oh my God. So I was even more intrigued. And so when I finished it, I was just amazed. I love it. It's great.
Awesome. I'm just going to sum it up pretty succinctly here. This is a perfect film. From start to finish. I think that this is my third 100 I'll be giving on the channel. I'm just going to say it right now. It's in my top 10 now too. This is easily one of the best films I've ever seen. One of the best films I would say ever made. It does have an issue with it that I think we'll discuss when we get into some spoilers, but it does not affect the movie itself. It's more a reflection of the time in Hollywood, which I know Hannah and I think Adrian will kind of know what that's about. But again, this is a masterclass. There's a reason why there are two filmmakers that every director holds in high regard. The first is Akira Kurosawa, who gave us Seven Samurai, and which we reviewed on the show, and several other films, but also David Lean, who is attributed as one of the greatest directors of all time. So even Steven Spielberg is a huge fan of the guy, and actually headed up the remaster of this when it was transitioned from, I think, its original film to like a newer format in the 80s. But let's go ahead and dive into some spoilers, and let's get the big one out of the way first. This movie uses brownface. With Alec Guinness, who we all know as Obi-Wan Kenobi from the original Star Wars, portraying a real-life Saudi prince, which, again, you can't, especially for, and I feel like this is a little weird to say sometimes, but, you know, it is a product of the times, and it's inexcusable, but I don't think we should hold it against a film for doing it. I think it's more of a Hollywood problem. Again, of the time. What was your guys' kind of impression of that with the film?
Yeah, I mean, it's not subtle, you know. I mean, looking at him, you're like, that's a white man. It's not very well done at all. So it is jarring. It is. But again, like you said, it is something of the time that was of the norm. It wasn't something that people were criticizing. Clearly, because nowadays, if you tried doing that, you wouldn't be even nominated for an Oscar. Are you kidding? Like that's not a thing.
Yeah.
So I didn't really hold them to that. Like that wasn't like a big. I wasn't like, oh my gosh, this is the worst film ever because they used brownface. But like, of course, you criticize it because it's like we know that you shouldn't do that. But when you acknowledge that. This is something of its time. When this was made, this was okay to do. Doesn't make it okay, but it is what it is. You can't change it. It's in film, you know?
It's 60 years old at this point. There's nothing we can do.
Yeah, and I think it's one of those things, too, where it's like, at what point do you draw the line? Like, you can't ream an actor for reading lines off of a script that you don't like. Like, that's just part of the movie. It's not who that person is, and this was just part of the script. And that is how they chose to cast it, and that was the choices they made. at a time when it was okay. So I definitely didn't knock it for that. I definitely noticed it, but I definitely didn't knock it. And I think after I like initially processed it, it didn't really pull me out of the movie. After that, it definitely took me, I would say, like 30 seconds to just like tell my brain like, oh, that's what's happening. And then I was fine for the rest of the movie.
But what I also wanted to point out, which also kind of helps its case, is Alec Guinness is flawless in this movie. They could not have chosen a better actor, I don't think, at least at the time. I'm not familiar with the popular actors of the 60s, but it seems like one of the better choices they could have made. So, but while we're on this subject, let's go ahead and talk about performances, because I feel like we all three think that the performances in this movie are incredible. Especially Peter O'Toole as Lawrence, which
amazing.
There are some historical inaccuracies with this movie, I do know. For instance, he did not revel in the violence that takes place in the massacre towards the end. And he did know about the Sykes-Picot agreement. He did not, wasn't oblivious to it like he is in the movie. But that's not the performance. The performance is just exceptional. What did you guys? Any other standouts? Personally, for me, it was Peter O'Toole and Omar Sharif, who plays I can't remember his name. I think it's Ali, the Arab writer that comes out of the Mirage, which is, we'll get there in a minute because that's one of the best scenes in film. But what did you guys think of the performances?
Yeah, Peter is insane. And I also looked at the pictures of the comparison between him and the actual Lawrence. I mean, it's scarily accurate. Like they did a wow to pick a phenomenal actor who just so happens to also look very uncannily like Lawrence it's wild. And there's just the way that he held himself, like he really like set the atmosphere and tone so well in every scene, and he's so like enthralling and captivating as a character in a movie in general. Like I was invested. You're like, oh my, from the get-go, right when you meet him in the beginning, you're like, wow, okay, like what's going on with this guy? He really feels like he can do something, and it's just it's amazing. I love it. Peter's amazing.
And I think they set him up that way with the whole match burning scene in the very beginning. Best. Like it really that scene alone basically like kind of reveals his whole dynamic through the whole movie. And it's amazing that they were able to do it in one shot, and you don't even realize it while it's happening. But then as the rest of the movie goes on, you're like, oh my gosh, like that, it started right there. It's a personality thing. Like it's his mind over body. And it was incredible. The whole movie was really, really amazing.
Yeah. In transitioning from one topic to another, let's talk shots, because you were talking about the shot with the match. Cinematography wise, this movie is just incredible.
Still holds up. Yeah.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Oh my gosh. And as someone who I'm obsessed with the desert in general, so this was like desert cinematography porn for me. I was just like glued to this. It was beautiful. These shots are insane. Like, gosh, it makes you wonder, like, were these just off chances? Did they plan these shots? Like what was it? It's so, oh my god, amazing, so beautiful. And also just the composition of the shots too, just the way visually of where people are standing, how it's shot, incredible, so good.
Absolutely. And it's one of those trademarks of David Lean. I have not seen this is the first film by David Lean that I've seen. Also, I believe he did Dr. Zhivago and Bridge Over the River Kwai were two of his other most well-known films, all known for their cinematography. So the behind-the-scenes stories that I was hearing were similar to the movie The Revenant with Leonardo DiCaprio, where that movie used almost all natural light as much as this movie did, and if they didn't get a shot, that shoot didn't happen for the rest of the day. Like they went and did something else, or they just stopped. And this movie apparently had a 284-day shooting schedule, which is like 2/3 of a year, even more than that, I think, which is impressively long. I think the only thing that rivals that would be like Lord of the Rings and stuff like that. But absolutely incredible. And a lot of the shots are, and the other thing too, it's all in camera. They derail a train on camera.
Yeah.
They have thousands of people on horseback running at a coastal Arabian city in camera. And even I was watching an interview with Steven Spielberg afterward. He's like, even like this thing was like the 80s or 90s or maybe the 2000s when he did this interview. He's like, we couldn't do it now because you'd do it all in computer and it wouldn't be the same. And that was 20 years ago. So you definitely couldn't do it now. I mean, if I had to say they could do it today, the only director I would feel confident giving this movie to would be Denis Villeneuve, who is doing Dune and did Blade Runner 2049. He is the only person I could see doing it. Also, if you give it the Roger Deakins, the cinematographer for Blade Runner 2049, he would be able to do it as well, I think. But you shouldn't. This movie shouldn't be touched.
I don't think it needs to ever be even attempted to be remade in any fashion.
Oh, absolutely. But any other positive highlights we want to talk about? Because I think this has one of the most iconic film scores ever. Because they use it a lot.
It is, yeah. It's very, you're very aware of it. They make the music known, but it's not a bad thing. Usually, sometimes when you hear like, oh, like the music was like a lot, it's like it takes you out a bit. But this music really captured the story, the environment, everything, and it wasn't like a cliched score at all. It felt purposeful and it enhanced everything, and I loved it. I think it's so beautiful, amazing.
Yeah, I think one of my biggest things I always talk about is that if I tend to notice the score, that's usually a negative thing for me, because if it's good, I feel that it should enhance the movie. Like, I shouldn't necessarily be like, oh, that's a good cue in the music. It should just work. And in this case, that actually happened. I didn't notice it until, like, I was pretty much almost through the scene, and then I realized how good the music had been for each scene, because it almost felt like a character in the movie itself. The way that the score was evolving and the music was moving in and out of the scene, it was also telling its own kind of story about what's important and what's happening, and as music should in a film. And I thought it was really incredible.
Absolutely. And I do want to highlight a key difference, because there's a lot of people out there who might be thinking, oh, you reuse the same theme over and over again. Doesn't that get tiring? Well, number one, they use it in different ways. There's different progressions in the music. It's done at different volumes. It's done in different ways. But also, I want to compare it to another film that uses the same theme over and over again, and it gets tiring, which is another 4-hour movie called Justice League Snyder Cut. Where Wonder Woman's theme, the tribal one, keeps getting thrown in there, and it's cool at first, and then it gets really annoying. This is the exact opposite, where it's the same theme, but it's one of those themes, at least for me, I hear it and I think Hollywood. I think big budget films. I think like the golden age of Hollywood. That's what comes flooding to my mind, because it's really done in the way of those classic adventure movies like The Adventures of Robin Hood from the 20s. And a lot of the films, like even like Casablanca, want to have soaring scores up through the 60s. It's really reminiscent of old Hollywood, which I love.
Yeah, completely agree. I feel like whenever I hear it, I imagine that big band and the actual recording, and like you said, that old school. And I completely agree.
Awesome. Well, anything else you want to highlight? Anyone have anything you want to talk about in particular?
I have one. So after I watched this, I immediately went and started looking up like behind the scenes, like how was this done, details that I may have missed. And I think we all talked about how this movie's 4 hours long, but it doesn't feel like it. And I do want to point out to the point of seeing it in theaters with kind of the whole intermission and 70mm film. I actually saw The Hateful Eight in that format, where they had a musical opening. It was 77mm. They had an intermission where you could go back to the lobby, and then you came back into music and that whole thing. And it is incredible. If you ever get the chance to go see anything in that format, I cannot recommend it enough. And I agree with you that this movie, I would love to go see it. If they brought it back for like a weekend thing, I would pay a stupid amount of money to go do that. But and watching those reviews and stuff, I think the reason this movie didn't feel 4 hours long is because the way that it's done. The whole first half, you're really spending time with Lawrence, and kind of every shot, like they don't skip over any time. It's all taking place in camera, on screen, his whole evolution. And then the second half really focuses more on who he is as a person now that he's established, and we start jumping in time. And it starts to pick up pace in terms of actual covered time. And I didn't really pick up on that, but I think that is 100% why this movie's masterful in that aspect, is that it's paced so properly. and so well that by the time you reach the end, it felt like a normal movie to me. And it had been an extra 2 hours, and it was just like, boom, done. And I wanted more. It was incredible all the way around.
Absolutely. And one of the biggest things too is that modern film wouldn't do this, where you have 2.5 hours of establishing how he unites the tribes. Yeah. This movie, if made today, would be cut down to maybe 2.5 hours, and would be mostly the attacking the train lines and the taking of Damascus at the end and things like that. Whereas you get a lot more character development in this movie that is just absolutely incredible. So
yeah, we would have gotten some sort of montage for like 5 minutes that showed how he united them. Basically, what we got was a very masterful part 1 and part 2 film put into one in an expert way with an intermission. It is split, basically. It's basically 2-hour movies, but done in such a way that it continues the story where you almost don't even realize it. Mm-hmm. If you skip over that intermission, it's like the same movie, and it feels so good. And it's incredible. I was totally blown away by this. I had no idea it was this good.
Hannah, anything else you'd like to discuss?
Yeah, I mean, I was even just thinking to myself, like, even before we started talking about all this, I was like, what if we took the full movie and we, like, cut it, like, down to basically, like, a 2.5 hour runtime? You would get the same story, but I don't think it would be nearly as impactful, and I don't think you would be, like, leaving the experience feeling the same way. I feel like you'd appreciate it. It would still be a good movie, I think. Definitely. But without the pacing and the actual, like, the time and, the character development, I think it would be lacking in that. I feel like a lot of the emotions and build up to the ending would be missing so much entirely. And so that's why I feel like it's so crucial to have it at this length. While daunting at first, I remember looking at it being like, oh my gosh, I'm going to watch a 4-hour movie. Holy moly. But, like, once you get past that idea of, like, I'm watching a 4-hour movie, it doesn't matter, because it really means nothing. The length means nothing because you're in it once you start. I swear. It's such a magical film. I love it when films do that, where you don't even think about how much time has passed, and you realized, like, by the end that you're like, oh shoot, like, half my day's gone. I didn't even realize, like, I was so invested in this that now it's like, oh my gosh. Yeah, I really would love to see more films take a bolder step in this direction, because especially now with how the whole idea that people need shorter term entertainment, I just don't buy. I don't buy it. I feel like that's the corporate idea of, like, let's just get quick cash, you know? And it's such a shame. I feel like we need to bring back more meaningful and longer length films, because if a story requires it, let it be that long. Don't cut it. Let it be that long, and let it be what it is.
Yeah, I think I completely agree that in media we always hear, like, Avengers Endgame is 3 hours long, and I'm always like, I'm fine with that if the story requires it. Like, I have no hesitation if the movie's 4 hours long, if that's needed to tell the story. So I completely agree with you on that. And I also think the length of this movie is necessary, because it is almost perfectly cookie cutter. The first half is all positive for Lawrence, and then the second half is the downfall and the negatives. And it's literally all 4 hours are a perfect arc of someone's rise and fall, like mentally, physically, all the stuff. Like, it is amazing how this movie works in the exact time that it is. I think if it were any longer, could have been too drawn out. If it were any shorter, it might have still been a good movie, but we would have missed out on so much that makes this movie amazing. It would have been good, maybe not great. And I think that's where the difference is it was given the exact time it needed to tell its own story.
Absolutely. And I do think that along those same lines, one of the strengths of this movie is that, we keep talking about if it was made today, right? If it was made today, you would have Lawrence, standing up for his, Western morals more often, and then the Arabs backing down. For instance, when when one of Ali's men kills one of the others towards the beginning of the movie, and Lawrence has to execute him. In a modern day movie, that wouldn't happen. He would be like, no, this is wrong. And, they'd be like, fine, well, you're just some ignorant, Westerner or whatever. But no, he takes the gun and executes the man. There's a lot of moments where, you feel like you know the moral decision, but you really don't. And he takes the one you don't expect, which I think is really commendable, especially for building the character and building the story as well.
Oh, yeah.
So, anything else you want to highlight? I mean, I don't think there's really any negatives that anyone has about the movie. The only one I would say is I feel like the ending is a little abrupt. Like, it just kind of cuts off as he's on the way back home. But we do get to see what happens after that at the beginning of the film. So it's not, that's why it's not a complaint of mine. It's a really, really tiny nitpick.
I think it's kind of one of those things where, like, I was talking about the arc of the movie, and then it kind of puts you right back to where you started. Like, it kind of just completes the circle in that those last few minutes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I loved the ending. I love that harsh end. It's like back to reality of, like, back to the beginning. I loved it. I love it. Mm-hmm. I don't think it should have ended any other way.
Yeah. So, I mean, I agree. I do like the ending as well. I think it's just, I thought it was a little abrupt, but again, tiniest of nitpicks, and it doesn't affect my score. So, but
clearly
else?
You gave it.
Yeah, I know. He'd be like, "No, I'm going to change it." But let's go ahead and get into some final thoughts, and then we'll wrap it up. Adrian, final thoughts, or actually, we'll go to Hannah first. Hannah, final thoughts on Lawrence of Arabia.
Yeah, this for me is a masterclass in cinematography, screenwriting, acting, and directing. And did I say editing? Editing.
You did
all of it. Like, it's so well done. I feel like if you're not interested in the plot, you're going to be interested in something. There's something about this film that's going to grab you, and I guarantee you're going to be stuck. So I recommend this to anyone and everyone. There's really not a bad thing I could say about it. Great.
Awesome. So if you had to score it, what would you give it?
100.
Cool. All right.
Definitely. It's genuinely, how can I say it's a masterclass in all this stuff and give it like it's an 80? No,
yeah, it's got to give it 100 now.
It's great. 100%. So good.
I agree. My final thoughts, I guess, would be, so I want to relate it to how I just watched Singing in the Rain for the first time, per Garrett's recommendation also, actually, or that was his suggestion. And to me, that was a good movie, and that held up as being a good movie. This is absolutely a great of the greats movie. If I talked positively about Singing in the Rain, it is like tenfold for this movie. And that's like, I'm just relating it because that's an older film, and that's kind of my first dive into that era of film. And this is by far, if you can get past the 4-hour little time that you see on your TV, and you can just click play, I cannot recommend this enough. You will watch one of the best movies that has probably ever been made. It is absolutely incredible from beginning to end. It has so many layers to it. It tells so many different stories. Just in every single frame, there's stuff to dissect, and every conversation has purpose and meaning. And it is just absolutely incredible. I also agree it is a master of film, a master work of film, and I also gave it 100, which I believe is my second 100 on this channel.
All right, I think that's the first film that has gotten a complete 100 rating. That is
with a third person, also.
With a third person. Yeah, so really cementing the 100. But I mean, I've already given my thoughts have been made clear this entire time, and I gave it 100. But really, if you are listening to this podcast, and I know a lot of the people that listen to this podcast are friends of ours or people who are of the same age range, you are doing yourself a major disservice if you can't just kind of get over that initial hurdle of 3 hours and 47 minutes. It is so worth it. It is so worth your time. If you can sit through the schlock that is Justice League Snyder Cut, you can sit through this.
Can you tell that Garrett does not like the Snyder Cut?
Don't blame him.
I mean, hey, it's better than the old Justice League, but it's not a whole lot better. But that's not about this video or this episode. But yeah, just get over that hurdle of the 3 hours and 47 minutes. It is truly some cinema that, from the reactions of everyone else here, is a masterclass. You are seeing a master at work, making one of the best films of all time.
Everybody in it is a master at work. I mean, literally, I cannot think of a single person that could have worked on this movie that did not give their heart and soul into it to create something magical. And if you really can't swallow the 4 hours, it does have an intermission, so you could do this in 2-hour increments. And if that is needed for you to just watch this movie, then do that, because you just need to see it overall.
And I would also say that this movie is, well, it's not slow. It's slow-paced enough where you could pause it at the end of a particular moment as it's transitioning and just pick it up later. You won't get the same experience of watching it all at the same time, but at least you will have seen the movie. And even that, I would say, is much more, nice to see than just, it's 3:47. I'm not gonna do it.
Yeah.
So,
agreed. Yeah.
But and so just to clarify, this movie is not available to stream on any platforms. You do have to rent the movie. It is, I think, like $3.99 to rent both ways on Amazon. Ooh, Hannah.
I will say, I don't know how long it's going to be up for, but there is a full version posted on YouTube. Someone did upload.
I saw
the whole thing, and it's not one of those scammy things where they like click the link to. It's the whole thing. So. Just Google it, search it up on YouTube. It's like one of the top choices.
There you go. Well,
yeah, I saw that after I rented it and was very devastated.
Oh no, I went all. I was like, I have to watch the 4K version. I gotta pay the money to rent it. I was just like, I gotta see it. Which I'm really mad. There is no 4K physical copy of this movie yet, which I think makes sense because next year is the 60th anniversary, so maybe they're gonna put out a 4K.
They're holding out. Yeah.
Yep. Here's to hoping.
I know there is a Columbia Pictures box set that comes with, I think, like 6 of their greatest films or something like that, and it's in there as a 4K copy. But that box set's like $400, and I'm not paying that. But hopefully we do get a copy of it soon. But that is going to bring it to an end of the podcast. Hannah, I know you've actually been pretty active on Twitch and such. Where can our listeners find you online? Well,
I am now transitioning from film expert to pro gamer. I am quite the transition. I'm streaming on Twitch at Rats Only Club. That's right. Rats Only Club. That's my brand. We're all rats. Come hang out. I play games sporadically. You'll never know when I play. So that's why you gotta hit follow, and then you'll know. So.
And the link
awesome
to
commit on the schedule. What kind of games do you play? This is the first time finding out.
Oh yeah, I play a wide variety. Very strange. I play recently. My recent obsession is Genshin Impact, which is now becoming a gambling problem. So we're gonna try and stray away from that. But I also play Fire Emblem. That's a big one. Nice. A lot of my viewers love Fire Emblem Three Houses. We play Valorant, Breath of the Wild, everything.
Nice.
Everything. Wow. We're gonna try new stuff coming up. So
you never know when, and you never know what. And I love
surprise!
That.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
We love surprises.
Yeah, that's awesome.
All right. Well, thanks for coming on again, Hannah. It's always a pleasure to have you on. But Adrian, if we know where to find her online, where do we find us?
You can't.
Oh.
No, you can. We are pretty much on every social media as the Drive Back Podcast. You can find us on Instagram, which is where we have conversations with our fans, and we kind of chat back and forth in DMs or even movie ideas and all that on our posts. So if you want to kind of suggest something, that is definitely the place to do it, or comment down below on this video. But definitely make sure you hit the little bell and that subscribe button so that you actually get notified. We do post every Monday. And we also do exclusive content here on YouTube that you won't see or listen to on our podcast, where we actually do real now streaming things you can go watch right now that just came out. We do spoiler-free reviews and then spoiler-filled reviews a couple days later. So you can kind of get our thoughts, see if you need to watch the movie, watch it, and then come back and see if you agree with us or disagree. Yeah. But everywhere, the Drive Back Podcast, you can find us.
And you should subscribe because we may or may not be doing an Army of the Dead review. We'll have to figure out if that's going to happen. See if Zack Snyder can redeem himself in any way. But
it's actually a sequel to Justice League, isn't it? No, I'm just kidding.
It's just under the guise of a zombie movie.
It's actually, it was just supposed to be the post-credit scene of Justice League.
Right.
It was a full 2-hour post-credit scene.
If we don't see the Joker in a police vest up there going, I'll be upset. But thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. Remember to like, comment, subscribe, all the things that Adrian has said already. And we'll see you guys next time on The Drive Back. Thank you for listening to this episode of The Drive Back. Make sure to be on the lookout for new episodes every Monday, and make sure to follow us on social media.